From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politti and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start shopping.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Rant. Loads to talk about. I promise we're going to get to the kerfuffle. Not the perfect word for that, but the kerfuffle at Penn State, the aftermath of that game. But let's just start with basketball. We are a sports podcast. I got to tell you, down 19, given how that team played against Michigan, I wouldn't have thought that Rutgers could score 19 points, much less erase a 19-point deficit. You've got to hand it to that team. Just an incredible comeback against Penn State, maybe a season-saving comeback. Fonseca, you were there. I mean, just give me a sense. You sort of captured it in your story for the next morning. Give me a sense of just how cathartic that win looked like based on what you saw coming off the court there.
Right. So the visiting locker room at the BJC is adjacent to the press room. So I'm waiting outside the press room for Steve Pikiell to walk in to do his press conference. And I'm looking at the locker room and I see him standing outside the locker room. Before he even steps in, he screams louder than I've ever heard him in my life. I've been around him a lot. I've never heard him scream this loud. And when I talked to him one-on-one after, he denied it and said it was the players, it wasn't me, all this stuff. But you could tell just like the sigh of this, I called it a scream of relief they had just to kind of, because you're right. If they lose that game, especially the direction that was going, that looked a lot closer to a 30-point loss than a 3-point win. That would have like completely, I was the only one really for a long time saying that, ringing the bells, that would have sent alarm bells throughout everybody. Like everybody would realize that's your 5th loss in 6 games. You're fighting to not finish in the bottom 4 instead of finishing in the top 4. The season goes completely off the rails. For them to turn that game around and win it completely turns around the season. We can discuss a bit on what it means, because I think a lot of people are taking victory laps for still believing when they were down 19. I think that game was as much lost by Penn State as it was won by Rutgers. Rutgers, you jinxed them completely by saying, in a good way, by bringing up your article about how their offense is horrendous. And then the second half, they score at 1.5 points per possession, which is absurd. I
control the universe with my Twitter feed. People should know that by now. And I only use it at times when I think it's most important. And that was one of these incidents where I decided I should change the course of history by tweeting.
Well, they must have seen it in the locker room because they hit every tough shot, every mid-range jumper. Oscar Palmquist hit 2. Oscar Palmquist's role is every time he gets an open 3, he has to hit it. He hit both his open 3s. Caleb McConnell turned into prime Kobe Bryant, hitting mid-range jumpers, big 3s. Cam Spencer was creating space. Steve Pikiell was running the triangle offense, running the same play over and over and over again and finding open looks. Everything worked out offensively for Rutgers. It's worth pointing out that Penn State has the 3rd worst defense in the Big Ten. They have no big, but all that being said, that was not something that Rutgers took advantage of in the first half, and they really took advantage of it in the second half. And then on the other end, Penn State missed every open shot they could take. Seth Lundy, the 2nd best 3-point shooter in the Big Ten, went, I think, 0 of 11 on 3s the whole game. Rutgers got some more 3-point luck against Penn State, but to its credit, they defended the heck out of Jalen Pickett, made the rest of Penn State beat Rutgers, and the supporting cast really could do nothing.
I mean, it's just you give Steve Pikiell credit because he made in-game adjustments. That looked like a bad JV high school basketball team on offense in the first. There's no other way to put it. I mean, it was sloppy. You just didn't know what they were doing. Paul Mulcahy looked lost, and then Pat, I think they just put the ball in Derek Simpson's hands, and we saw flashes of what that kid can do driving to the basket. In early games, he sort of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. I don't know what happened there, but it was just a good decision. And the game was great. I mean, just legit great. He made some moves to the basket in that second half, especially the driving layup with the N1 that kind of put them over the top. It just really an impressive game.
It was an incredible game for Simpson. The high ball screen was working incredibly well. He gave a shout out to Cliff and Wolf, like they were offensive linemen after the game, which was kind of exactly what it was. They kind of set it up for him perfectly, and his speed allowed him to get to the basket. I don't know how sustainable it is. Like, you're not going to get 16 points a game from Derek Simpson every time, but it certainly worked in that scenario. And he had that huge game against Indiana, if you remember, at the beginning of the season. So he's had his moments to shine, and this was just a perfect example of that. I'm sure we'll get into it about the rotation at some point in this conversation. I would love to see how Pikiell addresses the rotation from here on out, whether Simpson kind of makes his way into the starting role, how many minutes he gets per game. That'll be fascinating to watch over the next couple games.
Yeah, let's go there now. I mean, there've been a lot of readers chimed in about getting him in the starting rotation. They only have 6.5 guys. It's not like there's, it's not like he's going to play a lot of minutes, Brian. Do you think this calls for a lineup change? But it is March now. I mean, the next game's in March. It's not exactly the time you start doing a lot of heavy tinkering. They have a lot of experienced guys still in the lineup. I mean, what do you think Steve Pikiell's going to do in this next game?
Steve Pikiell's not going to start Derek Simpson. I would be shocked. He just does not mess with starting lineups. He doesn't want to put Paul Mulcahy, a guy who's a senior, on the bench. I would just be surprised if he did that.
What about Hyatt? Could he put Hyatt on the bench? Hyatt was coming off the bench. It was better in that role earlier in the season. Could they switch those two?
So you're putting your 2 point guards in the starting lineup?
I'm just spitballing here. What I mean,
like you alluded to, they have no depth, right? There's not really much room for maneuvering here. I think I could see Derek Simpson playing more minutes, maybe 25 instead of 20 a night. Paul Mulcahy has struggled significantly as of late. I don't know if it's some people are speculating about his injury, about his shoulder. The injury he tweaked the other day was his opposite shoulder from the one he hurt at the start of the year. So I don't know how impactful that is at all. But the truth is he went 0 of 6. He didn't score. He looked tentative offensively. And Simpson kind of had a one-track mind. He gets the ball, he goes downhill, he gets to the basket, and he scores, right? Not particularly efficiently. He was 6 of 14, right? But he hit tough shots at big moments, there's something to be said there. One thing worth mentioning with Simpson, right? I think he had 0 turnovers. I think Rutgers had 4 turnovers as a team. That's easy to do when you play the 3rd worst turnover rate defense in the country. Penn State does not pressure. They don't force turnovers. So it's a relatively easy assignment for a freshman guard because he doesn't have to worry about that pressure. What happens when you play a team that does pressure you, that does try to force you turnovers, like Temple? Like, he struggled a lot against Temple earlier in the season. Obviously, he's had a lot of playing time and he's developed a significant amount in the last 2 or 3 months. But that's always a question you have with freshman guards. Paul Mulcahy is not the most secure ball handler in the world, but you trust him a lot more with the ball in his hands in March in these big moments. But I guess Derek Simpson won't learn how to play in those moments until he does play in them. So I don't know. I think to wrap this around, I think Derek gets a little bit more minutes because of that. He really showed he's one of the few sparks plugs in this offense that can create things when there's nothing there. Because like you said, in the first half, it was really just dribble, pass, dribble, blocked, unable to get to the rim, throw up a shot as the shot clock expires, right? So he adds something they don't have otherwise, but I don't know if the trade-off there is worth it, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm still, this team still scored 59 points. It's the second time they've scored in the 50s and won a game in this stretch. I mean, I'm still not, I don't know, that's good. They needed that win. That kicks all the pressure off their NCAA stuff. I think if you beat Minnesota, you got to beat Minnesota. They're terrible. They're going to get in. I just wonder that you're right, Pat. When you say it's not sustainable, I just think they're going to really have to. There's going to be another close game. They're going to have to win these games, low scoring games. They just haven't shown the ability to do anything else.
Yeah, but at some point, each game, someone has stepped up when they win games. Let me preface it by saying that when they win games, it's someone stepping up who you don't suspect to be stepping up. Like Andre Hyatt had his game against Penn State the first time, Simpson this time, right? Palmquist has had big moments. So, maybe Mulcahy has a bounce back game here at some point. Cliff has a dominant game. The way Rutgers scores and the way the production is so balanced that you never know who is exactly going to be the big guy on any given night. I think that's not exactly the recipe for March, right? Like, you want one great scorer in March, like a Ron Harper or somebody like that. But for now, it's at least a way to keep teams on their feet, I guess, keep teams on their toes. So,
all right, let's talk about everyone's Rutgers favorite topic, Penn State fans. And I knew something was that you're watching the end of the game, and Brian, you were there. She didn't see it on TV, but Pat, I'm sure you saw what I saw. Where when you saw the way that both Cam Spencer and Caleb McConnell, 2 guys who don't do this, right, to see the way that they were responding after that victory, and it was directed at the crowd. It was very over the top, and I looked at it and I'm like, my first reaction, well, that's not cool. But then my second reaction was very basic. Well, that's not them either. That there's something up about that. It turns out there certainly was something up. Brian, did you get the sense when you were there that something was going on with the crowd? I mean, what put us in the gym. Was that something people were talking about in the arena?
No, I found out. So I only found out about the Caleb McConnell talking to Michael Shrewsbury for some time in the handshake line because you texted me and saw it on TV. I noticed Cam Spencer celebrating, throwing the ball across the court when the game ended, but I didn't notice him jawing at the fans. And the crowd was better there than I've ever seen it at Penn State. That's not saying much, but yeah, I didn't realize the scope of this until that tweet with the screenshot from the group me of the fans of the student section acknowledging the vulgar words that were said. Allegedly.
Vulgar and racist in that email. Vulgar and racist, right?
Allegedly, yes,
right. Yes,
I think the words were N words and F bombs.
Yeah. We didn't pull that out of thin air. That was something that came into that was from the
Penn State students saying, we need to cut this out.
Yes, guys, let's stop throwing around the N word. Oh, great idea. Yeah, it was like, what the heck? It's just when I saw that, I was like, this is crazy.
Yes. And then obviously we had a long day yesterday of communicating with Penn State people, and Penn State did a very swift, thorough investigation. And by 8:00 Monday night, realized that no racial words were used. They discussed it with many people, allegedly. They noted talking to AD Pat Hobbs, people in the Rutgers traveling party, the Penn State police. It took about 8 hours for them to realize that no racial words were allegedly used. So I'm sure that this will close the door and definitively, and we will know for a fact for the rest of the time.
Forever. If there's one thing you can count on, guys, you can count on a Penn State internal investigation, right? I mean, they should have been a statement. It was just horseplay. I stole that from someone from Twitter. Great line, whoever that was on Twitter. Thank you. But yeah, I mean, that I don't know, Pat. The statement was kind of weak. I thought the apology was kind of weak. And I get it. You're in a bad position if you're the AD, because you don't want to say if it didn't happen. You can't really tell if it happened or not. Clearly, from talking to people, it was vulgar and player directed. I know that for a fact. I mean, that was what everyone said. They're just riding Caleb McConnell, and that's bad in itself. I mean, just I get it. It happens everywhere, but still, it was obviously for Rutgers to react that way, for that statement to come out. It was just something happened, right? I mean, I'm not.
Remember in football season when we had there was the big national news story about teams going up the same tunnel and altercations happening in the tunnel. I think there needs to be some sort of conversation about having students sit behind the opposing team's bench, because that seems to be just the perfect storm for scenarios like this to happen too.
Where else is that? Is that anyplace else? That's a great question.
I think Illinois, right?
Illinois, Maryland, Michigan State.
Huh. Wow. I didn't realize that.
Head. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, it sets the stage for this kind of scenario. But regardless of that, whether it happened or not, the statements from Penn State were kind of like word salad-y, exactly what you would expect them to say. And I don't really know what to make of it. But the one thing I will say is that no one at Rutgers made a big deal about it publicly, at least.
Right.
They commented. They didn't want to make a big scene about it. So unless there was no outrage from the Rutgers side. So that's why it kind of is going to just go into the air and be swept under the carpet, in my opinion.
Yeah. And that was good. And that was the right move by Rutgers. 100%. You don't want to make it a big deal. You want to focus on your season. The moment you make it a big deal, you're going to have, people like me down there and Piscataway on Wednesday before your big game against Minnesota asking questions about it. I understand that completely. Yeah, it's just become a national issue, a national story, as you mentioned in your post on this. That's not going away, and it's just it's really sad. I just hate the fact that these college athletes can't go to games without this stuff happening.
I'm curious to know. This is not something that's just recently started happening. This has been happening for half a century, probably. They probably did this in the 70s and the 80s. They were probably just as vulgar, if not more, right? Not to excuse it. I'm just saying this is probably a long-term college sports tradition. I reckon it happens at most places, far more places that care to admit. Apparently, Penn State was not even the worst they've seen this year on the road, right? So I agree that there's a national conversation to be had about this. I don't know exactly what the solution is other than to muzzle students, because they're gonna say what they're gonna say. So they're gonna have to do something. I just don't know. Maybe having a police person sitting in the student section. If you catch one person saying something over the line, you kick them out of the game. That's really the only solution I can think of.
All right, let's move on and dive into true false really quick. I only have a few items, but good items. course. You guys know how this works. True or false? This victory against Penn State will galvanize the team. Galvanize the team. I've heard that before. Fonseca, what do you think? Is this the one that's going to change the course of the season? True or false?
Well, if you ask people around the program, they didn't need any galvanizing. They're fine. So I'll say false. There's no need for galvanizing.
No need for galvanizing. Pat?
I'm going to say true. I mean, down 19. That was a 20-year comeback. So, yeah, I'm going to say true.
Okay.
Much needed.
I'll go true as well. True or false? Stop it, Politi. They were lucky to win the game. I mean, both things can be true, right? I mean, Brian, were they lucky to win that game?
You need every bit of luck to come back from 19 points down. So true.
Of course. And that's not their fault. Yeah. Pat, true or false?
Absolutely. I was waiting for a Micah Shrewsbury explosion in the press conference. That didn't happen. He just said he got out coached, but that was a lot of luck there.
A lot of missed shots. All right. True or false? It is senior day coming up this weekend. Cliff Omori will be back next year. True or false? He's not walking in senior day. Interesting. Does that mean he's going to be back? What do you think, Fonseca?
I don't think he knows, to be quite honest, yet.
Okay.
So this is purely guessing me. I will say true.
Wow. Okay. Pat?
I'll say true as well. I think he still needs some development.
I think he should be back next year. It's a shame he can't get NIL money. I'm going to say false for now, and hopefully he will be. All right. True or false? Paul Mulcahy will be back next year. Is he done with college, Brian? True or false?
True. He will be back next year.
He will be back. Okay.
I expect him to be back. Yes.
All right. Pat?
He's Mr. Rutgers, the way Heichel talks about him. So I think he'll be back as well. True.
John Newman and the boys get him a check for some money of the NIL. He will be back next year. True. All right. Andre Hyatt will be back next year. True or false? Does he even have eligibility before I put him on this list? He does, right? Will he be back?
He does.
Good.
Very interesting. I think he will be back, but he is going to be competing for a position with 5-star freshman Gavin Griffiths. And so does he want to come back and do that? Does he want to go somewhere where he can play more minutes? Interesting situation. I'm going to say true.
Okay. Pat, do you think he's going to be back?
Yeah, keep the nucleus.
We're bringing the band back together.
Yeah.
Right? True or false? Caleb McConnell has a 17th year of eligibility. True or false? I know that's false. I'm kidding. Okay. True or false? Rutgers will beat Minnesota easily on Thursday. Romp Fest. Stop worrying. True or false? What do you think, Brian?
They better after not wanting to move their game to Tuesday to accommodate Michigan State.
Boy.
And also they better because Minnesota stinks. I said that last time and people got worried, and then Rutgers won by 35 points. I think they'll win this one by 15 rather easily. True.
Okay. Pat?
I'm going to say false because they're still trying to figure out this offense.
Yeah, I don't think there's any easy with this team at this point. I will go false as well. I'm going to add one because Brian mentioned it. True or false? Rutgers was absolutely right not to move the game against Minnesota. True or false?
Listen, I don't care about it too much. I'm going to say false, but I can understand why they didn't want to move it.
Pat?
I tend to go with the ethos of this situation, and you should have bent over back for Michigan State after all they've been through. So I'm going to say true. They should have moved the game.
I'm going to go 100% false. I think the easy solution is to not play the game. I mean, why is this a conversation? Just don't play the game. A terrible thing happened. What do you need? You just so Penn State can finish 4th instead of 6th. I mean, so Michigan State can finish 4th instead of 6th with an easy win. Who cares? Don't play the game. All right. That's my opinion on that one. And finally, true or false? And this is going to segue into a great text we got from a reader. Rutgers will get a double bye in the Big Ten tournament. True or false, Brian? Is a double bye possible? Is that going to happen?
Possible? Yes. Going to happen? No. I'll go false.
Pat?
Let's go. They beat Minnesota and they beat Northwestern at home to close out the season. Everything else falls into place. They get the double bye.
I like it. We could talk you into anything. I love it. All right. I'm going to go false, but I think it's going to be really close. All right. So this is the thank you to the texter, Tony and Lawrence, one of my favorites, texted this to our Rutgers Insider. Please subscribe program. Not a question, but a PSA. There are 14 total Big 10 games left with 12 relevant to the double bye determination. Of those 12, if home teams win 11 and Rutgers wins at Minnesota, the number 3 seed. There are other positive scenarios for us, but this is pretty straightforward and as likely as any other scenario. Thank you, Tony. So I went there and I got down I got out the whole thing here. And and of course, just trying to process it, even with that few games, it's just basically impossible. Every team in the league is 11-7 or 10-8. So there are 7 teams in that position, but it's not as crazy as you would think it would be, right? So you got Maryland. They're currently in second. They're at Ohio State, at Penn State. All right, 2 road games. You got Northwestern, Penn State at Rutgers. All right, maybe they win one of those 2. I mean, you look at it at Michigan's at Illinois and at Indiana. Again, it's like Iowa's at Indiana playing a red hot in Nebraska. Okay, that's a bit of a force. You can see though that there's I don't know, Brian.
It's convoluted.
Bail me out here. It's convoluted. Bail me out here, somebody.
Look, let's let the 19th games get played first before we start doing all the scenarios, because you're going to drive yourself crazy. Maryland isn't going to lose both games to Ohio State and Penn State. That's one team that's going to be ahead of Rutgers unless they win their 2 games. Michigan and Indiana go head to head. If Michigan wins, they guarantee they're ahead of Rutgers because they have the tiebreaker head to head.
Right.
I think Iowa plays Indiana. If Iowa wins, or they have the same record as Rutgers, they have the tiebreaker. Let the first games get through. Let Rutgers beat Minnesota first. Like they're going to beat Minnesota.
This is no fun.
Well, all right, we could spend 3 hours on a podcast doing all the scenarios, right? Or
I think it's as simple as though you root for Indiana. They play Iowa and Michigan. I think they're clearly the second best team in the league right now. They win those 2 games. That knocks Michigan down 1. Okay, we covered that. So then you're rooting for the 10-win teams to win. So if Illinois beats Michigan and loses to Purdue, see that they're out of it now. All right, this is tough. You're right.
Wait, if Illinois beats Michigan, Rutgers would still need to win both of their games.
They need to in my scenario, Rutgers needs to win both of their games. Yes,
we're just assuming Rutgers wins both of their games, as we've seen.
We're not assuming.
As we've seen in the past
conversation.
3 weeks.
Well, they're not playing they're not playing 76 Indiana here. They're not playing the Lou Alcindor or UCLA team. They're playing Northwestern and Minnesota. They could win both those games.
They're not playing Nebraska, who's clearly one of the better teams in the Big Ten.
Hey, wait a second.
Save
Nebraska
us,
beat Rutgers, beat Maryland.
That's what I'm saying. They're not playing juggernauts like Nebraska. They're playing poor little second place Northwestern. Right.
I will say this: I don't know if the double bye really does help anybody, because you're still going to play a better team in that game anyway. I mean, Rutgers had it last year, and look what happened. I mean, they got destroyed at the Big Ten tournament in what was a quick trip for us to, where were we? Indianapolis. Quick trip to Indianapolis. Yeah. So I don't know. Anyway,
look, you get the double bye. The minuscule chance of winning a Big Ten tournament goes up a little bit, right? There's one less game you got to win.
This is true.
I don't think it's likely that Rutgers wins the Big Ten tournament. I'm not even sure it's likely they make it to a final, but you got to be in it to win it. So
got to be in it to win it. Yeah, and it is. I mean, again, it is a crazy year in the Big Ten. The fact that there are 9 teams that can finish third, essentially, or we're looking at now, kind of wild. All right, good job, Tony, for bringing that to attention. We to the several texters who asked us to shed some light on this. I'm sorry, we can't. But I think you would root for Indiana and root for Michigan to lose, and just hope that Rutgers win both games, and you'll have a shot.
And always root for Nebraska.
And always root for Nebraska. I don't know, whatever. You guess you can do that. All right, some more questions, folks, from our friends. A lot of people wondering what to do with Paul Mulcahy. What the problem with Paul Mulcahy is. I mean, I think the answer is you're not going to do anything. But a few games ago, Paul Mulcahy looked like he aggravated the shoulder stinger. How much, if anything, is that contributing to his run of bad games? That's from Tony again. Any chance we'll see a 4-guard lineup with Simpson replacing Hyatt? Thank you for putting that in there. Gives him the closest thing to what they had with Jacob Young or even Geo Baker. A good point there. And Tom G from Florida, I think this is the first time he asked the question, wants to know if coach is seeing that Mulcahy dribble dances into the paint with no intention of shooting, and opponents seem to have figured out that Mulcahy is not an offensive threat. Brian, take any and all of those questions. What are we doing with Paul Mulcahy?
you're letting him play through these issues and hoping that, one, he gets a little bit more aggressive shooting. He's just not taking as many shots as he used to. Maybe the shoulder thing is an issue, but if his shoulder was so banged up that he like can't do anything, I would think that he wouldn't play, right? Because at that point, you're just hurting the team if your shoulder's literally not letting you shoot the ball. So he has to be more aggressive. He has to hope his teammates hit more shots, because when they hit more shots, things open up for him. And I guess you play him 5 less minutes and give those other minutes to Derek Simpson. I'm not so sure they'll play a 4-guard lineup. I don't think they have played that often under Peichel. I think, and especially not in the Big Ten, where every team has a big man who can really exploit you if you go too small. Penn State has learned that the hard way. I don't know. I think Rutgers really needs Paul Mulcahy to get back to not even his best, but playing better, because their ceiling goes up a lot higher when he plays better. I'm just not sure if he's going to be able to get out of this slump in time. The season's, like we mentioned, there's 2 games left in the regular season, minimum 2 games left in the postseason. His window of improving is closing.
Yeah, Pat, I do agree with what Brian said, and I think he will get out of it. I do. He plays Minnesota. That's a good matchup for him, and I think Northwestern's a good matchup for them. They're good they're better defensively, but still a decent matchup for him. And I wrote it early in the season, like this team is going to go as far as he can carry them, and I don't think that's changed.
I don't think that's changed either. And just look at the way the team struggled when he struggled. There's obviously a comparison there to be made as well. Look at his game against Michigan State at the Garden. That was a thing of beauty that he really put the team on his back. So like you guys said, just let him figure it out, and the ship will sail on.
All right. A bunch of questions on the Rutgers offense. And it's funny. It's one of these things that divides the fan base. I wrote a column about it, and then it was after the Michigan game. And I just saw some things in the Michigan game that, again, I just didn't know what they were doing. And I felt that way a lot watching Steve Peichel's teams. I think people took that as me saying Steve Peichel can't coach offense. I didn't really write that. I just said he has to find a way to fix it. And this is readers are divided on it. One said, "Plenty, I'm not sure I agree with the idea that Pike can't coach offense. He got the gritty players he needed to be consistently good playing defense to attract the flashy offensive kids. Now we'll see if he can coach both offense and defense." What do you think? I guess that's a good, this is something when you're covering a college team, you try not to put it on personnel, heap it on personnel as much, because they're not the ones making $4 million. Is this a personnel thing, Brian, with offense? Is it as simple as getting Ace Bailey, getting Gavin Griffiths? Is it as simple as that?
Every offense in the history of basketball looks better when the players executing it make shots. Rutgers is not making shots right now. Since Max gotten hurt, they're shooting 43% on twos. 43% on twos. You can't shoot 43% on twos. They're already shooting 30-something% on threes, at low 30%, something like 31 or 32. That you just can't, when you're not putting the ball in the basket, your offense is going to look bad. I think people saw the clip on Twitter circulating of that one play. They kept running chest middle they ran it like 5 times in the second half against Penn State. It was working, and they kept operating. That play looked marvelous every time the ball went in the basket. What if they had missed 5 of those shots? People would be saying that they can't coach offense. Clearly, Steve Peichel and his staff know how to coach offense. That's never in question. It's always about execution, and they don't have the horses to consistently. There's not. Who's the one guy on this roster who you need a bucket? You need someone to create a basket. I still don't think they have it. They don't have a reliable big man you could dump it into and score, because Cliff, as I wrote last week, has the lowest shooting percentage on layups of any player in the Big Ten who took at least 100 layups this season. They don't have a reliable three-point shooter who can create his own shot. Cam Spencer can shoot well, but he has to have some help, some screens, open up his space. And aside from Derek Simpson, who did it against Penn State and Indiana, they don't have a guy who can just dribble into the paint and create something, get fouled, score. So to answer your question, it's the personnel. They don't have enough personnel, enough horses to run an efficient offense, and that's why they're 170th nationally in offensive efficiency.
Just a counterpoint, and this is what I will say: if you put the other 13 Big Ten teams in front of me, I could probably summarize their offensive identity in a sentence or two. Maybe not all 13, but like Penn State, I could do Michigan State. What is Rutgers' offensive? Explain to me in a sentence. Wow. What is the Rutgers offensive identity? 7 years into Steve Peichel, I struggle to do it. And I'm not, again, I get it. Like he does not have
I think they want to play big through Cliff.
Yeah, but they don't. But they don't.
Cliff, but they don't.
Do they? They don't.
No, they don't. But I think that's what they want to do, and it just hasn't happened.
Right.
Maybe because of execution, maybe because of another reason. But
they are so easy to defend.
They had such an advantage against Penn State in the paint, and they just couldn't. They couldn't execute it.
Because Penn State did what every team has done, which is they push Cliff 5 feet from the basket, and they make man up on Spencer and make sure he can't shoot. Right?
Yeah. 100%.
Well, this proves my point. When you have teams that can't shoot threes, you can pack the paint and put 3 guys in the paint and not let Cliff get shots because you can leave everyone open. They're not going to make threes. You think Penn State, when Caleb McConnell was wide open shooting a 3, is like, oh no, we left them open. We left a 24% 3-point shooter open. Those are risks you take. And then even when you give Cliff the ball in the paint, he's shooting 48% on layups. It's the personnel. Tough. If Steve Peichel had Zach Edey, I think the offense would look a little bit better. If he had Trace Jackson Davis, the offense would look better. If he had Miller Cobb, who's shooting something like 44% on threes, the offense would look better. It's the personnel. And look, that goes back to the coaching staff because personnel is all about recruiting and getting good players, right? Obviously, they're fixing that in the upcoming classes. But until you can get guys who could score, you're going to be what this team is. This team is a team that will defend its butt off, hold you below 65 points, and eke out enough points throughout a game to beat you. That's just the way it is. I mean, that's the way it's been the entirety of Steve Peichel's tenure here, like outside of Ron Harper Jr. and Geo Baker developing into decent offensive players. It's just what it's been, and you can get an identity when you have a good. Like, what is Purdue's identity? Dump the ball into the best big man in college basketball of the last 10 years. And let him score, and then
this is not the first time Purdue's been good offensively, though. I mean, Matt Painter's had a bunch of teams that, well, they've had good players, sure, but
their identities get a big man who's taller than everyone else in college basketball, let him score around the rim at 60%, and then have shooters who can nail it down in the perimeter. Yeah,
good debate. We'll look forward to next couple of years when they do have good players to see what happens. So. That'd be fun. All right. Along those lines, hey, look at this great transition. A recruiting question. Do we get Harper? Do we get Kurtang? I love that name. Odds on getting those 2 players. All right. I don't know anything about Kurtang. I will tell you, I have been around. I'm doing just a little preview. I'm doing a little feature on Dylan Harper, whose high school team, Don Bosco, unfortunately lost last night. I will tell you this. I mean, this is not one of these situations where Rutgers is in the top 5, but we don't expect it. I think they're definitely in with this kid, and I don't think a decision has been made. It's going to be them or Duke. And I mean, if you had to toss a coin on that one, heads or tails, I think it's 50-50 on Harper. Kurtang, Brian, do we know what he was at the game? You talked to him briefly. What do we know about him?
Kurtang was at the game. He was on his official visit to Rutgers last week. I talked to him briefly to get his contact information. I have not been able to talk to him since the visit to get a gauge on how it went. But Rutgers is in it for him. I think them, Providence, and Michigan State are really the 3 teams he's looking at. Michigan State, he took an official visit to in the fall, and people thought he was going to go there based on how well that went. It seems like they've cooled off on each other, I would guess, given that he has not committed there yet. So really, it seems like it's going to be Rutgers and Providence. And I would say Rutgers has a good shot with him. I don't know if I would call it a lock or anything of that sort, but I would say that Rutgers has a decent chance of getting your new favorite player, Kurtang, on into the fold.
Yeah, and obviously to get Dylan Harper, Pat, that would be the biggest recruit Rutgers has ever gotten. I would think bigger than Ace Bailey because he's in state, higher ranked,
and the
to beat Duke.
The process has gone on and on as well, right?
Yeah.
And he's just obviously a legacy with his brother. Seems like it would be quite the big deal. So yeah.
And that kid is, I mean, Brian, you were at the game, one of their games in this tournament. I've watched him play a couple of times now. He is really good, and he is still only 16, and he's still growing. He can handle the ball. He's bigger than Ron already. Yeah, I mean, that would be a transcendent recruit.
Yeah, I watched him play about 5 times this year, and every time I always come away impressed. Just his ability to control the game. Just he plays at his own pace. It feels like he's playing, a step ahead of everybody. He's able to, like you said, great handle on the ball, can finish around the rim. His shooting could use some work, but that's to be expected for a 16-year-old. And yeah, I mean, the kid is very impressive. And I would agree with you for all those reasons that he would be the biggest recruit in program history, but he would also like cap off the class, right? Like he is the one crown jewel missing. Then you have 2 top 10 players. You have every position covered except for center, which you could always fill in the portal. And you'd have a 2024, 25 roster that you're looking at like this is Duke level in terms of having elite freshmen and a chance of doing something really special at Rutgers that hasn't happened since 76.
All right. We got a bunch of questions, a bunch about whether Penn State will apologize for what happened. Did I don't know, did the statement last night qualify as an apology? Does that answer it, do you think? No, Pat, you're not.
I don't think there was ever one. They said we're disappointed with the conduct but there was never a flat out like we're deeply sorry for the Rutgers players or anyone that went through this. So no, there was no official apology.
Right. And Sue in Somerset wants to know any clue to what Coach Shrewsbury and McConnell were talking about at the handshake line. Touched on that a little bit. I really think that it was about. I don't think Shrewsbury understood why Caleb McConnell was reacting the way he did at the end of the game, because they were just riding him mercilessly. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. If you've watched Caleb McConnell for these 5 years, you know he is just an excellent person that you want representing your program. That was just a bad scene, right, Brian? I mean, there's no that's the only explanation.
I pulled Caleb aside after the press conference and asked him, and he said that he was telling Micah that he has a great program, and Micah was telling him that he's a great player that he likes coaching against. I have a feeling there were a little bit more words exchanged there, but similar to the situation with the fans, I think everyone kind of just wanted to move on and move past it and not really play it out in the court of public opinion, which is unfortunate because I was really looking forward to hearing the intimate details of what they were saying, but it is what it is.
You like to play it out. We are the court of public opinion, damn it. All right. Another ref blunder. A couple people pointed this out. My friend Ed McNamara from SHI on Twitter threw like just a gallon of gasoline on the Twitterverse and was, I think, regretting it late in the day based on his mentions afterward. But just to throw the fuel on another referee conspiracy, it looked like Andrew Funk of Penn State was out of bounds. Didn't look like he was out of bounds before his last ditch shot. As per highlights video on ESPN, yet it was not called. I realize it's a quibble at this point, but what the hell? CJ in Basking Ridge says, of course, I didn't see it at the time, but I am not a Big Ten referee paid to make these calls. As Ed points out, he's looking right at it. The ref standing there right at it, and yet they didn't call it. I mean, I don't have a question here, but wow.
You know how the PGA Tour has a hotline where fans watching on TV could call in and snitch on guys cheating? The Big Ten should have a hotline where that hotline would explode within 5 minutes. Every charge call, every block, every out of bounds. They should have fans patrolling the sidelines and just pointing every play like he's out of bounds. He's out of bounds.
I know you're joking, but let's get that.
Isn't that what Twitter is basically, right? Like,
sure,
pretty much, yes.
So we should have a Big Ten official. You guys watch? I don't know how much soccer you guys watch, but there's the video review booths where they have other referees like sitting down watching replays and kind of communicating. They should have just a guy sitting in a room with 4 monitors of Twitter and then communicating with the referee, where Ed McNamara of Shai Stadium, Mr. Referee, he just tweeted that the ball was out of bounds. They'll stop the play immediately and end the game. Why even have referees at this point? We should just have fans call the game live, give them all whistles, and then put the volume on the monitor and let them whistle every time there's a foul. So I think that would be much more efficient. And that way no one would have complaints because fans know exactly what happens on every play and they're never wrong.
I mean, but his foot's right on the line, though.
I mean, what if he made it? But what if he made
that shot and they lost 2 road games in the Big Ten because of the same call? I mean,
first they would go to overtime and Rutgers would have a chance to come back from this game. Second of all, I watched it a couple times and I can't tell definitively if the bottom of his foot touched the floor or if it was above. I'm not saying he did or didn't.
Looking at the picture of it here.
I watched the video of it. I watched the sequence of it and I couldn't tell. So I'm not saying he was or wasn't out of bounds. I'm saying I couldn't tell. So and also it's a tough spot for a referee to make that call, you know.
Right. My favorite thing so you mentioned the golf thing, Dan Wetzel, this is a bit of an aside, but Dan Wetzel, the excellent columnist at Yahoo Sports during one of the Masters, where it turned out that Jim Nantz himself called in and saw that Tiger Woods had made an illegal drop in one of the replays and called up the Masters and told them that. And it became a huge kerfuffle as whether he was going to get disqualified. Well, Dan Wetzel said anybody can call it. Apparently, anybody can call it in the rule, and put the Masters' phone number in his column at Yahoo Sports, and just shut down the switchboard apparently until they had to call him and up in the press room and beg him to take the number off. And he's like, "Well, it's listed in information." Anyway, sorry, but that's just a little aside. I love that story. All right, one last question. And of course, it begins with, okay, maybe not for the podcast. We'll answer anything on this podcast. You must know that by now. But does Rutgers fly or bus when they play at Maryland or Penn State?
They bust to Penn State.
They bust to Penn State.
They bust to Penn State. I believe they also bust to Maryland.
They also bust to Maryland. So busing is like a 3-hour. Did they bust to Boston? I don't think so. I think they flew to Boston.
To when they play Temple at Mohegan Sun?
When they play Boston College?
You mean football?
Yeah.
I think football would fly to Philadelphia. I think they bust to Temple. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Does football fly to Penn State?
No, I believe they bust as well.
I
believe they bust to Boston. I'm just being a bit facetious here. I believe they bust to Boston. I'm fairly certain basketball bust to Mohegan Sun. I think anywhere busable they'll bus, and then anywhere they have to take a plane, they like Ohio, Columbus, they fly out obviously. So.
87 individual helicopters for the football team to get to Penn State. All right. Good question. I didn't know the answer to that. All right. What else? I know what else. Wrestling. What's going on, Pat? Bring me up to date.
All right. Let's bring you up to date. So the Big Ten tournament starts on Saturday. It's at Ann Arbor in Michigan. And Rutgers this year doesn't have a guy that's going in that's favored to win. They have a bunch of guys that they're going to get through to nationals. I think the over-under is probably about 5 or 6 based on the allocations and things like that. But Rutgers' highest seed in brackets of 14 is 6. And that's Boone McDermott at heavyweight. So, we knew this all along this whole season that this was a gritty team, like with just a lot of scrappers without a real hammer, as they like to say in wrestling. And that's what we're kind of seeing now in the Big Ten tournament. So, the goal will be to get as many guys through to nationals as possible. And like I said, I think the over-under is about 5 or 6.
So 6 would be a good year at nationals for Rutgers this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then when they get to nationals, it's about, can they keep their streak of All-American stat? Like they've had an All-American the last 7 years. Can they get someone to finish in the top 8 at nationals?
Who's the best chance? Who's the best chance of that?
Well, Dean Peterson, their 125 pounder, is looking really good. But he's in this crazy bracket in the Big Ten where he's actually the 8 seed.
Wow.
That just to show you how good the Big Ten is. The Big Ten could get 8 spots at nationals. Yeah, I think he's a really good shot. Joey Oliveri at 141 could be a sleeper if he has a really nice tournament. And then Boone McDermott, the heavyweight, I think has an outside chance at potentially being top 8. So I think keep an eye out on those 3 guys.
All right, women's basketball, the 11th seed in the Big Ten. That's pretty amazing job by Cookies Washington in her first year. Got to give her credit. 8 players in that team. Yeah, I mean, that's good stuff. Do we know who they play?
Northwestern.
Okay.
Who's the 14, right?
Correct.
I would assume if they're the 11. Correct.
Yeah.
Good math. Yeah. Good job by her. Joey Chandler for our staff has done a good job covering them this year. You can look at some of the stories about a couple of players, bright future, good recruits coming in. That seems like they're, for her first season for a team that's going to have a losing record, 8 players, not bad.
Don't think they could have hoped for anything better, to be honest.
Yes, absolutely. That's it. What else? Anything else? Final thoughts? All right. Well, then on that note, let's sign off. We'll be back. I guess we'll be back next week to preview the Big Ten tournament, correct? To sum up the senior day, to see where the team is. Selection Sunday fun. This is going to be great. It's March. Look at it this way, guys. It's March. Your team's probably going to be in it for the 3rd straight year. That's just cool. So we'll be here to recap it all. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.